this is how we started in this POWs, because I have read quite a few books about the subject written by the archives or memoirs, etc. But I felt there is a gap showing the feeling, which is with the pictures and documents and their letters, which explain how they felt, how they hold the life under these conditions. That's how we started. And then I've collected these over 20, 25 years, and I've exhibited around the world in a philatelic format, which is a slightly different. So that's how this book started. And that is what the title is, Ephemera Perspective. To start the subject is that there were two major organizations, which is the Red Crescent and Red Cross, which is the backbone of the POWs, to help them out. The Red Crescent is founded in 1869 and by Hungarian origin Turkish, well, Hungarian origin Ottoman, I should say, Abdullah Bey. And the interesting thing is the first members, almost all Christians. And then they started to do proper work during Balkan Wars and obviously the First World War. As it started as a society, but then being taken over by the state and then this state fund. And it was the first Muslim organization such. So it basically is the born of today's Red Crescent. And sorry, I should show you. These are the first set of stamps issued by the Red Crescent Society in 1913, showing their work, basically. In the second, sorry. And the International Red Cross Society, they formed in 1864. And the Red Crescent Society, because of the Crimean War, they realized that there should be some organization to help them out other than the state. The same applies to International Red Cross Society. It is the Battle of Solferino from the southern Austria-Hungary. That's how it started. But they were really, really active on the First World War, and they helped hundreds of thousands of people. Because don't forget, we're talking about a couple of 100,000 Ottoman soldiers. So on the other hand, the Western Front, talking about 1 million, which is a huge amount, Russian and Austrian-Hungarians and Germans. And the main, obviously, is delivering the letters and parcels and visiting the camps. And then they produce fantastic reports. And there's quite a few, actually, information in this book comes from their reports when they visited the camps. They visited the camps in Burma, Egypt, and all other places. And then they publish their reports to the public. Obviously, they can't put any sanctions or anything, but at least they published so people can see what's really happening. And then these are a couple of postcards showing the headquarters in Geneva. And these are the volunteers. In that building, there were also societies, quite a few different organizations, but a couple of them I should mention is one is the Universal Esperanto Society, and the other one is International Feminist Organization Society. So they were 1914. Feminism is before the suffragettes or something. So it was quite interesting at that time. And the Danish Red Cross. The Danish Red Cross is very important because when American YMCA, but when America joined the war, the Danish Red Cross took over, and they were the main Red Cross society, particularly in Russia. So they were helping the prisoners in Russia, which is another subject we will come later. The next one, I'll just briefly write down the major campaigns on the Ottoman front. One is the Gallipoli campaign. We all know the Gallipoli. And then the total of 10,000 Ottoman prisoners been taken in Gallipoli, but most of them are after the armistice. When the armistice is signed in the November 12th, 1918, basically they become overnight prisoners. And the other big one is the Mesopotamia campaign, Iraq campaign. And then the Eastern Front, which is the Russian front. And the Sarıkamış story, I'm sure you're aware of. 70, 80,000 soldiers died in frozen death. But we have given about 100,000 to Russians, and which Russians has 2.3 million prisoners in their hand. So, but after the Bolshevik 1917, they all become free citizens. So that's another matter. And then on the other hand, the British side, or Allied side, I would say, the biggest one is the Iraq campaign, the Tupalamara. Over 13,000 British soldiers become a prisoner after the Tupalamara. And they had difficult times, obviously. That 13,000, imagine that those days there was no proper roads and there's no enough railway. And they have first been taken by barges to Baghdad. Then the very comfortable journey to Samara, which is 17 miles ahead. But then 200 miles march to Central Anatolia. To Mosul and then to Ras Al Ain, which is the border with the Syrian-Turkish border, and then they went to war. So that was really difficult for them. Although the officers were slightly lucky because they were traveling in better conditions, and some of them, if there is a car available, or lorry, I should say, so they were going with that. But it was a very difficult journey, as you can imagine, under the sun, 200 miles a lot of long road. The next is this is from the Turkish Chief of Staff archives. It tells you the Ottoman prisoners of war. That this is soldiers, by the way, because we as civilians we don't know. Because say that you're in England today, well, not in England. In those days, there were people in here, the Turkish people, and they become prisoners overnight. So we don't know how many of them. But this is the actual, gives you the figures. And out of 202,000, half of them to the British. And then the Russia came second, and then the France, and then the Europe. But that's I'll sort of a few seconds here, so you can see where the prisoners been taken. And then, as you see, the biggest one is the Mesopotamia, Gaza, Beersheba, Palestine battle. 85,000 of them become a prisoners of war. And then the Eastern Front is 55,000. And Galicia, when we say Galicia, it's Romania and Ukraine, because when the Germans and Austro-Hungarians, although they were one pact, so the Ottomans sent soldiers to that part, and they become Galicia, Romania, Ukraine. That's where we got 10,000 over 10,000. Now, if I briefly, what I'm going to do is, I will give you first sort of brief POW comes for Ottomans, and then the POW comes for the Allied soldiers. So if we go to the next thing, then the Egypt is the biggest place where the camps, particularly the city bishops, the big camp. The Abbasiya was a hospital, Cairo. The other interesting thing is that during the Hajj season, all the Ottoman citizens that were in Mecca and Medina, some were there and some were returning, being handed over by the Sharif troops to the British. So these civilian guys become the POWs, and they've been mostly taken to Cairo. And some of them are Egyptian, Ottoman Egyptian citizens, and then they were staying in Cairo in the POW camps. And on the weekends, they allowed to visit their families and then go back to the prison. So it was interesting times. All these camps, I mean, I should have actually done the map anyway. All of them is around Cairo, not far from Cairo. So around that, and then this picture actually tells you the condition of the soldiers when they've been taken. I mean, they were really poor conditions, and they haven't had food, some of them for a week, 10 days or something, and they've been deliberately marched through to the streets of Cairo. They did that in Baghdad. It's propaganda, of course, because they are the soldiers of Sultan, and then so which is understandable. And then yes, this particularly CD Bishop was the biggest camp, and they had a lot of good facilities. They printed newspapers, they played theaters. And one interesting thing, one of the posters up there, that one of the officers, he was a theater goer, and from his memory, they played the theater. They played but any money they get from there sent to the Izmir for the orphans. So I think that was very touchy. You know, the guys in the prison, POW, and they collect sort of whatever the amount, and they send it to Izmir for the orphan kids. And so I found that is quite touchy because the POWs used to get wages from the government, not the government, from whoever holds them. It was the agreement between the countries, and then the officers obviously much more comfortable. They get good wages, and the orderlies, if they're lucky, that they work for one of the officers, and they had a better life. But the others are the soldiers or the privates they really suffer. And the other camp is in the next thing. France, could be some mostly Gallipoli, the French got the prisoners, and then the biggest one is in the island of Corsica, the place called Ortale. That's the picture, the original picture, and then the writing underneath is the Ottoman writing. Translated, that's what it says. But you see Beaujean, Désir, Marseille, etc. But they were small amount, like 10s and 20s and 5s, and some of them are civilians, because France at that time they had very, very close relationship before the war, very close relationship with Ottomans. So there was a lot of Ottoman people that were living in France. And then, interestingly, there was no civilian POW camp in Paris, because that's what I expect. A lot of Ottoman living there. But there wasn't. I haven't found any information about it, which is, to me, I mean, there was in Ali Palace, Alexandra Palace was the first place for the civilian POW. But in France, there wasn't. Not the Paris, for the Ottomans, I would say. These are the places. And then the Gallipoli, this is original picture been taken in August 9, 1916. Which is during the Gallipoli campaign. So during the Gallipoli campaign, the Turkish Ottoman POWs, and then we have the Ottomans have the British, Australian, the answer types, or the POWs. But this is how they were because there was no camp or anything. It's war still goes on, and then behind the scene, this was the camp. And in the next, since actually it comes to Great Britain, that's a fantastic postcard. It's like a school thing. This is the Alexandra Palace POW camp. They weren't expecting to hold a lot, but they are overwhelmed. So they dispatched them parts of the Great Britain. But the biggest one was the Isle of Man, and particularly Germans and Austrians. And there were some. This is actually a gentleman who was living in Cambridge, becomes a prisoner, and has been taken to the Isle of Man. And I think there were not a lot, several non-orderlies in the UK, but other than all of the civilians. And this is in the Douglas in Isle of Man. 7 Turkish internees died in the. I think every year there is a trip goes on. I remember that from the central, the Turkish mosque, that they used to take trip every year to that Isle of Man to visit the cemeteries and to show their respect. So there wasn't much in UK except the civilian ones. And then the next slide, the unlucky prisoners, I would say, under the Allies, the ones went to India and Burma or Myanmar, I would say, because it was obviously Egypt is around the corner, but Burma is not. So in India, there was the camps of Bellary and Sunapur, and this is from Bellary. All these officers. A lot of officers went to Burma and India. The reason behind this, they keep them as much as possible away from the Anatolian Peninsula, Anatolia, because they're valuable, because they're officers. If they escape and go back, they can, you know, the orderlies or the privates doesn't matter where they are. So, when Egypt full, there was no space left actually, and then when Burma, it becomes the biggest one. So it's a lot of Ottoman POWs going Burma, and some of them came back in 1922 or something. So even the war is ended, but there's another reason behind it. We'll come to that later. In Iraq, there was the camps in Mosul and Basra and Baghdad, but they were all internment camps. So they come there, and from there they shifted to Burma or Egypt. But some of them, they kept some of them in Baghdad to use in the label. And that's a real picture. There's a few of them in the book. And I have the list of everybody's name. It's 1920, by the way. It's 11 April 1920 photo of the Ottoman prisoners labeled Italian. And this is what I said earlier on, that it shows the marching through Baghdad city. Again, it's from Baghdad and Basra. And these are the one who's being caught in Basra, put him onto the barges, and then they escorted from boat, and then they go to the internment camp. So Iraq was basically is all internment camp except the labor battalion. There wasn't much POWs left in Iraq. The rest almost all went to Burma and Myanmar. And then in the next slide is the.
Just before we move on, can I ask a question on this? How much did the life in the camps vary? So how much is, I mean, it's going to vary, of course, in different areas, but can you give us any sort of solid?
Well, there was a camp in Cannes, in Cannes, in France. So I'm sure that's a lovely camp. Well, British had kind of standards in their camps because they had their experience beforehand. And then so they had a kind of standards, but they were, depends where you are. I mean, in Burma, you've got a tropical weather, so it's different conditions. And then in Egypt, you've got the desert conditions. Internment camp is the worst ones because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know where are you going to go. You don't know what kind of treatment you're going to get. But once you went into the camps, you settled. You have a kind of life. And then you have a system, because all the camps, particularly the Burma and the Egypt camps, the big camps, they have communal places, they have cinemas, they have theaters, playing fields. In some of them, I think that it's nothing to do with Ottoman, but on the Austria-Hungarian side, they have shops, they have trading, they selling, making money, and kind of things happened as well. So in the beginning of the book, of the introduction, I said that they have found their realities. They try to find their realities during their imprisonment. So generally speaking, it was a standard thing. In the beginning, yes, it was difficult, but then they get used to it. Except Russians, I'm going to come to that. There's a reason behind all this. About the British camps and the French camps, they were fairly good and okay. Yes, there were some incidents and etc. I wouldn't put them as a generalized things in the incident happens. It's war.
One more small question.
Okay.
Do we have any letters or anything from prisoners sent to Burma, for example? Because
yes.
Someone from Anatolia suddenly finding themselves in Burma is going to be quite
Oh yeah. There are letters, and then some of them takes months to arrive. And there was one letter maybe it's in the exhibition, and then the guy puts writing on top of the card. It says, "For the sake of humanity, this is a POW letter. Please forward it from the family to the POW." Of course, I mean, what's keeping them alive is the letters from their families, because you haven't got a daily newspaper. You can't get war news because of the censor, obviously. And so only things keeps you alive it's a news from your families. And you have nothing to do. So you send letter. I mean, there are cases that the guy sends a letter. There's number 367 on it. So this is his 367th letter. Because he writes a letter every day, and it's free. That's the other thing. It's free to send a letter because they are POW. So what are you going to do? You write down a letter every day. But then the receiving the letter is the joy and problem sometimes, and the joy and parcels, obviously, because in the parcels is the guy sends. I used to work for a company called Stanley Gibbons. It's the oldest philatelic company in the world. And then there was one of those letters that says, "Please send me the latest Stanley Gibbons catalog." So I mean, to me, that was fantastic, because the guy is a philatelist, also a stamp collector, and then he's in prison, and then he's asking the Stanley Gibbons catalog. That was fantastic. And then the books, and then some guy So I shouldn't tell you all these, and then maybe later on. But anyway, so let's carry on. But don't. This is the Lemnos Island, Budros and Merina. This is again internment camp. The Gallipoli, during the Gallipoli fighting, any prisoners, they first, in the previous picture, you've seen that in the internment camp in Gallipoli. But from there, they moved to Lemnos Island. And then from there, they distributed to the camps, either Burma or at that time, mostly Egypt. And that is 1915 July, which is the, the beginning of the Gallipoli campaign. And I like that. This guy is a barber. And then we received the letter. The correspondence from that place, it's very, very scarce. I would say only a handful recorded. Because they stayed there a very short time. And not many documents survived. And don't forget, particularly on the orderly of privates, illiteracy is more than 90%. So the majority of the letters and documents from the Ottoman side we have is from the officers that they were educated. And then the privates, unfortunately, there wasn't much. And some of the camps, that's one of the reasons that couldn't find documents from all the camps. I mean, there's one camp in Cairo, the illiteracy is 98%. So what chance you've got a letter or something for that camp? Anyway, so that's it. Lemnos item. I put that here because it's quite a scarce item. It's not very elaborate, but for us, it's important as a philatelist. And then yes, we come to the. Anyway, I have a big voice, so you might still hear me. This is the Burma camp now we're going to come. There were 4 big. Used to hit it work. But you see, it does work. It's a Turkish style. Just hit it and it will work. Right. In the Burma, there were 4 big camps. Meiktila, Rangoon, Shvebo, and Tayetmo. Tayetmo is the biggest, and then Meiktila is the second one. This was a tropical place, obviously, and you can see the buildings. They are different. This is the left document. I put it here. That's the only recorded document from one POW camp, a prisoner, Ottoman prisoner, to another prisoner in the other POW camp. So they might know each other before they transferred to the camps, because this guy in Tayetmo, Captain Hasan Fehmi, and he sends to his friend, he sends to Hasan Fehmi. I don't know who sent it because he didn't write it back. To Sumerpur camp, so he knew he was there. Obviously, he wasn't. He was being transferred, or God knows. And then instead of returning to the original destination, under normal circumstances, that's what you do. If you can't find the recipient, then you return to the sender. They send it to Turkey, and that's how we end up finding this document. So it's an interesting document. And that's this is another. This is from a soldier who was serving. There's few of pictures, but I just picked one. A British soldier that was serving in Burma. He's seen at the funeral, and he took pictures of the funeral, and he explained how this is a Turk funeral, not the coffin. They are buried and only just wrapped in linen. That's the way they do in Turkey. So basically, the Islamic way of burial. I think this is what I was
hoping to show to people, you know, you can read this in a book or somewhere, but you see the picture. I think it does makes the difference. So that's where the and this is although the high-ranking officer. Unfortunately, all these years I have tried to find his name. He's a high-ranking officer, but I can't find his name. But he's negotiating or dealing and talking with the British, and then they all. You ask a question half the country. I mean, you can see all they dress is like white dress. So you know, they're fairly treated, well treated, and in order. Now we come to the worst place, I would say, Russia. God knows how many comes in Russia, but I have found these ones and I put it there. But then there were, if not 100 POW camps, maybe more, because they had 2.3 million Austro-Hungarian and German POWs in Russia, and then the 100,000 Turkish. So they most ended up in Siberia because that's the safest place for the Russians. But in 1917, Bolshevik, overnight, they become free. And when they were a POW, they used to get certain amount of money, 50 ruble or 100 ruble, whatever. And then when the 1917 inflation hyped up, so this 100 ruble would be enough for you for a month, and suddenly 100 ruble is a loaf of bread. So they really struggled. The biggest camps for the Ottomans was Krasnoyarsk and Vladivostok. And they've been carried, luckily in a way, that the Russians had the railway system. So instead of marching hundreds of miles in the Kutolamara case, they've been taken by the trains. But the problem is the trains goes to say that 3-day, 4-day journey. After a day, they stop by the forest. They come up, they cut the woods, then carry it on. Another, I don't know how many miles, and then they stop again. So this is how they travel. So it's okay. It didn't go very smoothly. Yeah, this is where they arrived, Irkutsk or the Krasnoyarsk. And this is a picture being taken in Omsk. They were friends in a way, you know, between the keepers and the POWs, because there were isolated cases, of course, but generally speaking, I think they were much human being then during the war. During the war, you just shoot to kill. But in that situation is different. Because it becomes part of your life, and you become their part of life. So this is before America joined the war, American YMCA was very active in Vladivostok. I mean, Nikolsk Usursk is next to the Vladivostok anyway. It's on the same sort of eastern part of Russia, Siberia, by the Japanese Sea. But even there was a picture in the book that they taken from the archives. A dozen ladies, or half a dozen ladies from America were in the house, and they were helping the prisoners. And the next one was one place, a very tragic place, I would say, is in Azerbaijan. Today they call Zira, the Nagin Island. It was the largest concentration camp. internment camp, but some of them had to stay for longer. And it was, as you see in the nickname Snake Island by locals because there were a lot of snakes. And for the prisoners, it is the camp of hell. There was no water in the island, so the water had to be carried from the mainland. And there is no picture of it. I've checked every archives possible that I have found. The only, because it's in Baku, just there on the tip, it's a small place. But I mean, I gave some figures here. Some stayed in there till September 1920. But 4 years, 45,000 prisoners passed through the island. 15,000 of them died. The snake bite disease. And there was a very rich man in I've got his name details in the book, in Baku. He himself, with some money collected from the Azeri Muslim, to help some of the mass graves of up to 50 people, which was kind of against the religion, but this guy helped a lot to have proper burial for them and etc. And the interesting fact is that when the Republic of Turkey is founded, the Republic of Turkey paid him back whatever he paid. They refunded his money. He didn't ask for a refund in the beginning. He started doing it as a humanitarian thing, but the Republic of Turkey was so touched, and then they paid him back. So yes, in the Russian, in the Russia, the Ottoman prisoners, not all of them, but some of them were lucky in a way that the communities, Tatar communities, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Uzbekistan, and Azerbaijan, they helped them as much as. Don't forget they're poor too, but they helped as much as possible. Some of them employed them. Some of them worked there and earn money to be able to go back to Turkey. And there is one incident, it's not in the book, but by the way, the bibliography of the book, in my book, it's probably I'm 95, 98% all the books or articles published in the subject you will find in the bibliography. And some of the things I deliberately didn't put it because if you really want to, you can find these books in a way, whatever. But anyway, just a quick story is that the soldiers who made it to south from Russia, ships organized by the Germans and Austrians and Ottoman to take their prisoners to their countries. The ships used to charge 5 Deutschmark per Austrian or German POW, and the 15 Deutschmark for Ottoman POW. And they couldn't find a ship for the Ottoman prisoners. Never mind the money. Well, I just say somehow. But anyway, one Japanese ship apparently that is being rented, and then he took some thousands of, several hundred, I would say, to Turkey. Not to Turkey, which I will come. Actually, I should have got the story when the Asimara comes along. Anyway, I'll come to that story because there is a connection with the postcard. So anyway, this is that. Then I left Malta at last because Malta has 2 different stories. One is during the First World War. The guys from embassy you see, this guy was in the embassy and becomes a POW. It's the local imam, the Turkish consulate. The first class, there was the barracks built by British garnisons, British army. So they were very useful because it is all there. The barracks still there, some of them in Malta. I don't know, I'm not sure all of them, but some of them. You got three classes: the first class and second class for officers, and the third class for the soldiers. So this was during the First World War. And then Malta has a second phase, which is on the next slide. The second phase is the political prisoners. Because they, after the armistice, the Allies occupied Istanbul, and then first they start collecting intellectuals and the politicians and then the important people. And then finally they closed the parliament and arrested 85 members of the parliament. And they all been deported to Malta. And during their stay, they never had a trial. And because you cannot consider them or count them as a POW, but because they were prisoners in a way. So that's why. And it's important because later, quite a lot of these guys in Malta become the founder of the Republic of Turkey, and they had very important roles. I put a couple of samples. One is the Major General Hakkı Mürsel. He's an important man in the history of Azerbaijan, and also he was the first general to enter the Izmir September the 9th, 1922. And then this one is the chairman of the parliament. There is another, actually I have the original letter here, but if you don't mind, I want you to read the letter. Again, it's a very touchy letter. It's Abdülhalik Renda, which is one of the best friends of the Atatürk, Mustafa Kemal, and his letter. And if you please, you read the letter, and I can have a sip of water.
I mean, we should take this to a close now, so you can ask questions and dive into the food. But I'll read this letter.
I have still few things to finish it off because not much left. If you want, just read the letter. So you can it just anyway. I shouldn't say anything. Just read and listen, and then you decide.
Dear sir, very often have I wondered whether two men have passed out of your mind and memory. Reference is made to Abdul Hakim Bey, ex-Vali of Aleppo, and Lieutenant Colonel Badi Bey, who you conveyed to Malta in HMS Sepoy over 3 years ago. Your then prisoner has not forgotten the kind sympathy which was extended to him during the voyage, and which was so truly demonstrated in the oft expressed wish that you be again charged with the duty of conveying your prisoner back to the country and home. It was a source of mingled consolation and regret upon meeting fellow deportees to Malta to realize that no one was able to give, in respect to his voyage and treatment, an account so as pleasing as mine. Ever since my return to Turkey, I frequently sought your address on ship in order to tender you my thanks, this time as a free and unfettered man. My appointment from Konya to the Governorship General of this province placed me in contact with many Englishmen, as also with the British consular representative. Thus, after much seeking, did I finally learn that you were in command of the HMS Viennetta, and so have I at last been afforded the opportunity to address myself to you, direct and assuring you of the sincere gratitude of your ex-prisoner, Vali of Smyrna.
I think that's a very interesting and nice letter. And now I'm going to go to the POWs in Turkey. Would you like to take a break, or shall I carry you?
I think we can can maybe leave it here
Okay,
for now, and then if anyone has questions about this specifically, you can
okay,
go to those.
okay. So that was the first part. The second part is the POWs in Turkey. So if you have
Any questions? I will
questions?
open the floor out now.
or no questions, that's better. Okay, so
Go ahead.
Just one question. It's about the delay in the release of the people, of the prisoners, and you're referring to 1920, April 1920, I saw on that. It's 18 months after the
Yes.
armistice. They weren't political prisoners. What was the reason for?
that's I should have actually. That is what I thought I have it, but I haven't got it here. That's because of the liberation war in Anatolia, and they don't want those prisoners to join the Mustafa Kemal's army, which they did eventually. So that was the main reason to keep them as long as possible. And then the Mustafa Kemal played his card that he had some British prisoners, so he kept them. So eventually they decided to exchange, and then they sent the Turkish prisoners to İnebolu, and then the Turkey or the Anatolian government released the prisoners, British prisoners, so they exchanged. But that was the main reason. They don't want them to join the liberation war in Anatolia.
That showed some considerable foresight then on the part of the British, because the War of Liberation didn't commence until quite some time.
1919 they started the war. So they kept as long as possible, but they released them in the 1920s. The war started in 1919 when the Mustafa Kemal landed in Samsun in May 1919. So that was the beginning. But the actual real war is the late 20s and the 21.
Yes, I suppose.
Yes, yes. And quite a few of them actually joined the ranks of the army.
I will go to the gentleman at the back, and finally you, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you for a really interesting talk, Kemal. I think my question, can you hear me? I think my question might well afford you an opportunity to talk about the POWs in Turkey, because it's tangentially related. Did you have managed to find any material or correspondence relating to Ottoman prisoners kept in Cyprus?
No.
Just because that's a particular.
No, I have a correspondence, the cover, but not a letter. Unfortunately, not a letter. And that's one of the things in the book. There were camps that I mentioned that in the book, that there are camps that I don't have any documents, and then that's why I didn't. And I have a friend who's a big collector in Cyprus. He hasn't had any as well, so we couldn't find it.
That's just because I was going to say, you probably touched on it when you're talking about Turkey. I certainly know from oral histories, and I think there have been some things written recently, but only published in Cyprus, North Cyprus, so you may not have seen them.
No, well, Professor Ulvi Keser is a friend of mine. Yes, I know.
So it's just a really strange scenario for Ottoman prisoners to be kept so close to fellow Turks, which I imagine is the same situation.
But mind you, some of them were Cypriot.
Yeah.
So it's as I said, it's that you're living in Britain and then become a POW overnight. So that was some of the dangerous, I would say, people in Cyprus, Cypriot ones, they kept in the, not all of them, because it's the half of the island or whatever the amount they're there anyway. So yes.
I don't know whether I ask just another question if no one else has one.
Yeah.
Sure. Admittedly, I haven't had the opportunity to read it, but I'm just really curious about how you go about finding these letters. Is there a particularly important central archive?
That's my secret. If I tell you, everyone will find it. No, it is. Well, I'm a philatelist, so I have connections with people all over the world, fellow collectors, and then this is exhibited in various places in the world. And then some of it comes from them. Some of them I bought it in the auctions. Some of them is just I was rummaging through the archives, or somebody selling something and rummaging through, and then because if you know what you're looking for, you pick them up. That's how I mean, I didn't get them as lots. It's 20, 25 years. You get one by one, and sometimes you get 6, 7. I was lucky with the POWs in Turkey, which is the British, because in England you'll most likely find material sent from the prisoners in Turkey to their families in Britain. So yes, that's how I find it. In Turkey, sometimes if somebody's archives comes up, and then you buy the material. And that's how it is. One by one is collected. Yes.
You had a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you for a very engaging presentation. I was quite interested in the stamp you showed in the beginning when you're talking about
Yes.
the Red Crescent. I'm quite interested. How were these stamps designed and produced? Do we know who designed them? Was there a department?
I don't know who designed them, because that's one of the things in philately. We have a problem in Ottoman philately, in general of philately, because nowadays the designer is more important. Those days, designer is anyone can do it, kind of thing. You know, the design is very important. It's important is who you shoot the stamps and etc. They are very primitively printed, as you see. It's not modern technology. It's not engraving. It's a lithography. They printed by the Red Crescent Society as an income. So and then during the war, people used, when they sent their letter to wherever, then when you go to the post office and the post office guy says, do you want to take, there was a 10 para, each is value 10 para and 40 paras. 40 paras is 1 piastre or 1 lira. Do you would like to take the charity stamp? And if you say, yeah, please, that's why you put the charity stamp on it, but it's just voluntarily. So all the money they raise, they go to the Red Crescent. So that's how they started. And then in the later years, during the Second World War, they become obligatory tax. And then for the government, and every government has obligatory tax in their philatelic life to income for the societies and etc. But that's how they did it. So I don't know who designed it. Don't know.
Thank you.
Okay.
I feel like we might have, we've had a very good talk, but we've skipped out on the Turkish experience, or rather the British experience in Turkey. So could we, if you guys don't mind, really quickly
Okay.
the slides, and then we'll
Okay.
call it a day?
Yeah, let's don't break it up, and I'll go to the British ones. Okay. On the next one is we come to the British ones. They were kept in mostly central Anatolia, away from for the soldiers, not the civilians. Civilians, you have camps in. Well, this is one of the probably nearest to Istanbul is Adapazarı. It's a small camp incapacitated for unable to work, and then the Afyon is a big camp. This is an example that I have. This one, the top one. Because the Austrian and the Ottoman censor commissions, they were ironing the letters when they sent from them or vice versa, in case of invisible writing. But despite that, they found a way. I don't know how, in a way that, because I don't have a sample for it. But that tells you that even during that, the things that goes on. So yes, they are allowed to write 4 postcards or 4 lines per month. This is an example. But then they relaxed later. And there were 2,300 British soldiers. When I say British, mind you, it's Indian as well. Because there was, particularly after the coup, there was a lot of Indian prisoners. The Punjabi, all Punjabis are become prisoners of Turkey. So there's a lot of Indians, officers, Indians, and then the soldiers. So the British, covers available, except the Anzac. I separated the Anzac. Anzac is different. Yes, in 1916, there were 2,300. That's the figure comes from the International Red Cross Society's things. And then I put a couple of messages from the letters, because that's what makes me collect the subject. He says that, I'll give the details of it. Many thanks for 3 parcels of books this week being censored, but Glover and Temple read. It was being captured in Gallipoli. And then this is nice that it says we have a football field here at a topping game, English, French, and Russian on Thursday. I hope they do that today as well, but not now at the moment. Send off good pouch to Lieutenant Lewis Worcester. He saved my life. So these are touching messages. I mean, that's what made, to me, it was the important part of the book, is these messages. Otherwise, these cards, it doesn't appeal to anyone. It's just letter, but that makes the difference. And then in the second one, after the Afyon, we got Ankara, working groups and transfer points, and a lot of British officers stay there. And that's the famous, if anybody from Ankara, I am originally from Ankara, there's a place called Tashan, but that's the British officers were staying. And then it's in a philatelic world, in a collective world, the submarines are a big subject and quite scarce to things from submarines. So this is the British submarine HMS E7, and this is the Australian submarine AE2, which is the first ever submarine. The Australian submarine is sunk, and then the Burdur, Bursa. These are sort of small places, but I just mentioned it. And then there's the Chankara is for the French mostly. And this is their Christmas organizing, the picture taken by the Red Cross. And then they delivered it. There are interesting stories in the, oh yeah. The next one is you come to the Chukurova region, where the particularly Indian soldiers most suffered, I would say, because they were used to building the Berlin-Baghdad railway section. It's in the Amanos Mountains. And then you'll see that during the construction of the bridge in Hacıkari. And this is the stamp is being issued by the Republic of Turkey. It's the bridge that eventually built. And they today the locals call it a German bridge. And then well, this actually tells you this note on the back of this, sent from the Belemelik camp. It's one of the big camps. These places, Amanos, Mantus, Belemelik, Pozantı, Osmaniye, Tarsus, this is all sort of a, they're all close to each other. It's like a circle. Tarsus was mostly for hospital treatment. And then, yeah, it says I'm so bright Europe. This I've done several times. I have here 117 British and 103 Indians. Here they separate the Indians and British because on paper this is Indian Army. All in need of clothes and money. If something is not done soon, lay of these will die from clothing. And then the one of the obvious working conditions, because you work in this harsh environment, and the dysentery is the other thing. There's quite a lot of people died from typhus and dysentery, and this is a sample of that. It's a letter sent to the driver of the second Norfolk Regiment of the Royal Field Artillery, and then the black writing says that the forward to the construction battalion command, and then the writing it says he died in dysentery in hospital, wrapped and buried. We have few of these covers like that. Well, that's the unfortunately sad stories of the imprisonment. But yes, that region was important, particularly, as I said, for the Indian prisoners. And then the Eskişehir camp, it's a nice camp, I would say, because in Indian army you have Muslims as well as the Hindus and the Sikhs and most Sikhs, but they were Muslims, and they become prisoners of war. Okay, you're a Muslim, but you're fighting for the other army. So what can we do? You're still a prisoner. But at least they gave them a kind of freedom, and then they in Eskişehir camp, the 66 Indian Muslim officers, and they were like a tourist. They had to wear swords, and so they had a special treatment, I would say. So they because you know all the stories that in the Gallipoli campaign, and some of the Muslim prisoners didn't want to fight against the Ottoman army, and etc. And then Istanbul is mostly for repatriation, and then and as civilians. Beforehand, please. Quite a lot of civilians, obviously, in Istanbul, as you can imagine. Okay, if you can't go back, I can still read it here. There's a message from a wounded soldier in the one of the camps, and then the message is, in the beginning, as I said, that the letters are the most important. You send 100 letters, and then you would like to receive at least a 1 or 2 letters. And this guy would say, "Dear bro, when you are going to write to me, I write to you, don't you got time?" He has plenty of time, but his brother might not have enough time. I don't know, but that's one of the things. And then the Izmir and Manisa, mostly civilians, and then the poor merchant ship captains, because they only merchant ships and they deliver the goods, but they've been caught in the war and they become POWs, and they've been taken to Manisa. And then the other thing is in Turkey, unlike the British ones or the French ones, there weren't any camps because Ottomans weren't expecting to, I don't know what were they expecting, but they haven't had any camps. So all these places, the Afyon and Kastamonu, and there's another big one in the Yozgat, and they stayed in the hotels. They stayed in the old the monasteries, empty monasteries, schools. And in some cases, they allowed to leave the town about like 5 miles as long as they promise. Underline, they promise that they'll go back. So, just I promise I'll come back. So that's how I was working in some places. So yes, that has the thing is that in Turkey there were many camps. Maybe small, but in general they were all living in this kind of places. Yes, the Kastamonu it's the home of the second echelon from Kut. Kastamonu and then the Yozgat, and they were because 13,000 prisoners comes from Kut, so that was the biggest bunch of prisoners for the Ottomans. And then this is a general kind of view of the Kastamonu those days. And yeah, look, they stay in a Greek schoolhouse, chapel, library, recreation room, badminton court. So they have a badminton court. And then when the time comes, like we're talking about 1970s now, it's sort of coming towards the end of the war. Everybody bored. They don't want prisoners. That was the feeling. The censor law does not seem to mind now. Send me little warnings. Things are relaxed. So, and then there's another place, is Kayseri, Kırşehir. These are sort of slightly eastern side, and that's for mostly Russian POWs. And then we come to the the ghettos, and then the Konya
only listeydi şeyi postal. And this is how much they used to get. Majors 8 liras, captains and lieutenants 7, and orderlies say that 1 lira. So basically, the majors get 8 times of the orderly. So they can afford to keep 1 or 2 servants, orderlies, for themselves, which they work with. The ghettos is another good prisoners come, and the facilities is the hockey is the interesting one, and they run out of hockey balls, or they send a letter to Istanbul, the consulate, and they send the balls for them to play hockey, the hockey. And it was an unfortunate event in the Geddes that there was a big fire. Almost 80% of the town destroyed, whole town destroyed. And then the British prisoners had a credit fighting the fire and saving the considerable amount of Ottoman property. And like this is again important and rare because it's the RAF. There was Royal Air Force and Royal Naval Air Force. There were 2 different ones. Today's RAF actually comes from them. And then there was only 29 prisoners. And so there was very, very limited amount of documents received from them. And they were caught up in the good. Okay.
I'm so sorry, but we are absolutely out of time. This was fascinating. Thank you all so
All
much.
right, I thought this how I'm going to do the 1 hour time, and it seems like it's that. Okay, just briefly, quickly, 5 minutes, because they want to see the end of it. Okay, carry on into the next one, please, because I'd like to just one thing, because this is important. The Yozgat, it's the escape, the famous book of the Great War, the Road and the Door. You know, it was 26 officers escaped because that's related to the map up there. So that's important. And this guy is dying for a beer, and he says, "You are seeing, is there any beer left? I have forgotten what it smells like. What a life!" And then the next one, okay, that's the repatriation. As I said, Ottoman as late as mid-22, and the Malta Agreement. So if we go to the next one, and this is the ship to carry the coup prisoners from Istanbul, October 1918. And this is the 76 Punjabis of the British Indian Army when they return to, I think it's Southampton. That's where they come. So yes, we ran out of time. Thank you for coming and listening.
Thank you. Doing this live. This will be available on YouTube. Now to everyone here, we have food at the back. Please help yourselves. There's plenty to enjoy. Thank you very much.